Is it shareable?
Uh,
You are tuned in to that praising station, praise.fm, where we get our praise on. 24 hours, 7 days a week.
Welcome, everybody. It is Saturday, and here is another episode of Under the Scope. I am your host, Kimbralon B, LPC. And a little bit about this show, everyone. We get here on Saturday to talk about mental health and mental health awareness, any topics that we have. So if you here right now, you're in the right place. And before I even get started, hit that share button, everyone. It's Memorial Day weekend. You know, the weather's nice, well, at least where I'm at. So why don't you just share the love, share the wealth. You get it all here. So hit that share button. And wait, hang on, everyone. All right, everyone. So we'll just keep moving. All right. So again, a little bit about me. I am a licensed professional counselor in the state of Arizona. I've been in the field for about almost a decade, and I've worked with any and everybody. And I had such a passion for mental health and working with people inside of the counseling room. But I realized that some people don't even make it into the counseling room. So I decided to take the importance of mental health awareness outside the counseling room. And that's how Under the Scope came about. But one thing about Under the Scope, I will say, even though I want to conquer the world and tell everybody about mental health, I can't do it alone. So I had to find some of the most flyest, most influential people on the planet and their knowledge, skills, abilities, and everything they bring to the table. And most important, their contribution to mental health. And this is where we are today, everyone. So I do want to give a shout out to this platform I'm on, Praise FM Radio, right here on Facebook Live. You can catch us on praise.fm. On the website, you can catch us on YouTube, you can catch us everywhere. And we'll talk more about that a little later, about this fabulous station. I want to give my props and flowers to Dr. Lady Rain. She is a producer of this show and other fabulous shows. Without her platform, there'll be no me in front of you. So I'm excited about that today also. Now, going back to this Under the Scope thing, I have to let you know, I just didn't choose the name because it's cute. Right? I actually choose, y'all. You hear that? It's Saturday. I'm off the clock. All right. Anyway, keep it moving. So I chose the name Under the Scope, not because it's just cute, because there's a twist to it. So I bring my fabulous guests on here, being super transparent. They get the scripted questions because they have an opportunity to look at the information that we're talking about. However, I wanted to make this a participatory show, to where it's not only me asking the questions, you, right? Hit that share button and tell them too. You have an opportunity to ask our guests questions when we take them under the scope. And they don't know your questions, so we'll see how well they will do under the heat, everyone. So before we move on, I'd like to throw out my disclaimer. So any information on Under the Scope is for conversational, inspirational, and educational purposes, and does not substitute you seeking a higher level of care or going to other agencies to get the information, right? I don't want you saying, I heard it on that show, Kimbralon B said it. Go and check me, okay? All right. I think I've got all the preliminaries out of the way, and I want to go ahead and get this train moving out of the station, everyone. So today is really special to me because I have two special guests today, and both of them are really extra special to me. No shade against my other guests, but I work with these two like really close, right? But so my first guest I want to introduce to you is actually going to give us so much information on the topic that we're covering today. What's that topic, you may say? I'm glad you asked. So it's foster care and its impact on foster children and families. I chose this topic today, and we're closing out the month of May. Not only is it Mental Health Awareness Month, it's Foster Care Awareness Month also. And again, unfortunately, foster care is like one of those taboo topics that nobody really talks about. So I wanted to bring it under the scope with these fabulous guests and highlight it. So my first guest is really not a stranger before any of you all, if you've been with me on Under the Scope. So Sade Bradford Bond is joining me again on the show to talk about foster care. That fire that she has is amazing. And I like her story because she grew up in the foster system and she's an advocate for it, and she doesn't mind being transparent to get the word out. Let me tell you, it's a double header. I have my friend Christy Crawford, who has an experience with foster families also. So instead of her growing up in the system, her and her fabulous family raised all types of foster children everywhere, probably hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And I remember when she was talking yesterday, if they had it their way, they would probably have 1,000 children in their family right now, adopted children. So I wanted to bring both perspectives here on Under the Scope today, because even though we know it's a fabulous thing on both sides, it's a win-win, it does come with its challenges. And again, this isn't to deter anybody from being a foster parent or to bring shame to anyone who grew up in the system. I just want to talk about the mental health challenges that's involved on both sides, so we can gain an understanding in both sides to understand what's important for their mental health. So without further ado, we're going to probably do some popcorn style. So anyway, again, hit that share. It's not too late. What up, Facebook family? All right. I want to say my highs. You know, my mama taught me well before we get started. Hello, Facebook. Thanks for joining us. Anybody that's in the Zoom room, thank you for joining us on the backside, and that you'll hear all the shenanigans. So without further ado, I have talked. I am exhausted. I am going to turn over this segment, this show, and everything else to Sade. I'll have her introduce herself first.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you did a wonderful introduction, Kim, but I do appreciate you inviting me to your platform. I'm Sade Bradford, as Kim has mentioned, and I am an author and a speaker. I'm also a foster care alumni and a very proud supporter of members of the foster care community. So it is awesome to be here. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you. Awesome. Kristy.
Hi, I am Christy Crawford. I am a master's in psychology and an MBA, and I am about a little over 30 years in as a fostering home, one of the biological children in the home. I don't think they have an appropriate title, but that's pretty much how I describe it. So, and I work in behavioral health, mental health, case management for a little over 20 years now.
Lots of experience, everyone on this platform. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. All right. Before we get started with the question, and I do like to open up with a quote. And it says, it is estimated that up to 80% over the 400,000+ children in foster care in America suffer from a mental health issue, compared to 18 to 22% of the general population of children. That's why I wanted to highlight this today. And I remember on our first show of this month, I had my guest Kayla on, and Kayla's a caregiver, and I know she shed some light on the caregiving and how that impacted the mental, impacted her mental health as well. But I want us to look a little bit at the foster parent and the foster child. All right, so Sade, again, this is to your comfort level. Can you explain your experience in the foster care system?
Yes, so I can actually remember it almost like it was yesterday. The events that led up to myself and my siblings being placed into the Michigan foster care system. So one day, my aunt at the time, who had temporary custody over my siblings and myself, she pretty much set us down, kind of had a family style type of meeting. And she informed us that one, that particular day would be the last day that we would be in her home. And two, the following day, we would be leaving her home and being placed into foster care. It turns out that she had decided to give up her guardianship over myself and my siblings. And in that moment, because I was so young, I remember feeling a couple of things that still stand out to me today. So the first emotion that I can remember processing just in that moment was fear. I did not know a whole lot about foster care at the time, but I knew some kids at school who were in foster care, so I knew a little bit. But for the most part, fear set in, and then I started to feel a little sad, just all in this moment. And then I started to have some anxiety. And the first thing that I thought about was, am I ever going to see my family again? Will I ever see my siblings again? And for a young child, that's extremely traumatizing, even before we were removed, just to get that bombshell information dropped on us in that moment. And so my aunts, and before I knew it, by the end of the night, everything that I owned in terms of personal possessions were basically in that proverbial black trash bag that unfortunately a lot of young people, probably from my generation, experienced when they transitioned into the foster care system. And so that was, again, very traumatic. The following day, my siblings and I, we were placed into foster care, and that started me down on a road that I would say was very uncomfortable. I think oftentimes it was very hurtful, but I had a lot of experience going through the process of getting adequate mental health care, I think, for what you can do for a young person at that age. So that's a little bit about my story and kind of early beginnings of transitioning into the foster care system.
All right, awesome. All right, Kristy, so coming to you, to your comfort level, can you explain your experience and level of involvement with the foster care system?
Sure. So for as far back as I can remember, so I'm real close to 40. So it's real close to about 35 plus years that my parents have done foster care. So for me, I've always known this coexistence of other children of all races coming and living in my home. I have 2 other siblings, so I have there's 3 of us, and then at any given point in time, my parents would have 3 or 4 foster children in our home, trying to give them stability. So for me and my experience, it's seeing how my parents raised us and our expectations, and then seeing how the expectations were slightly different for these other children. And when you're younger, you don't always know why the rules are different for them. You don't understand why, probably to the most extreme is over the years we changed. So initially my parents, their rule was always the foster kids could never be older than us. And part of that was their education and knowledge of how child development works. And so they know how they raised us. So the bar was at a certain level. And so they never wanted the foster children. Most of the times they're taking in those higher acuity, the kids who have been extremely traumatized and abused. They didn't want them to be the influence over us, but vice versa. So for us to be the positive influence over them. And so over the years, the dynamic and age group changed as we got older, started taking older kids. And it's really difficult for foster parents with biological children to have a conversation with their biological children on the differences, because it doesn't compute. And it wasn't until I probably became an adult that I really understood the boundaries and the balance that my parents were trying to create in a home. So you have a 16 or 17-year-old who cussing your mama out. Where they doing that at? Because I'm not raised that way. That's not an expectation from my parents, but accepting and understanding that they have different experiences. They have different feelings and behavioral issues and mental health concerns. And the biggest one being trust. They don't trust adults to take care of them if part of the reason for them being where they are now is the adult that was supposed to take care of them didn't do that. So my experience is kind of all over the place, but as I've gotten older, considering I work in the field now, I understand that my parents did the best that they could to provide a nurturing and loving environment for these children coming into their home, despite what the negative connotation that typically comes towards foster parents. They come from a generation where foster parenting was about the check. And now that I'm an adult and I understand how the system works, the amount of money that they get does not compute to what you have to actually sometimes deal with. You get the unknown. You never know what that child is. That's what that child has endured when they walk through your doors.
Wow. That's deep. And that's the 2 different perspectives that we just heard. And in both of those, that's what I heard. A common thing that I heard that stuck out to me was trust. So now these are 2 beings who's having to navigate what trust looks like. So that can definitely present challenges like all around. And I'm glad that, Sade, you shared that, like, having to be like uprooted, like this is the conversation tomorrow. What we see now, no matter what that looked like, no matter what that situation was, is ending. And this was as a child. And so now I have to move and figure this part out. So this is what, a child or somebody else is going through when they're being uprooted. And you're being uprooted. Everything that you own, you said, was in that trash bag. Everything. So it's bad enough. It's like, I don't understand what's going on, why I'm having to move. But my life, my entire life is being uprooted. And then as Kristy shared, which I think is very important because I never thought about that. So, the foster family, the parentals, they understand what's going on, but the kiddos is like, now, wait a minute. Whoa, okay, they getting this kumbaya. Let's talk through this. And us, oh no, it's not happening. And, us having to figure out, us having to navigate through it. So you made me think about it. It's not only the foster families who's having to figure out how to navigate their emotions. It's in the bio children to the foster families. And so before we take a deeper dive into that, everybody that comes on Under the Scope, I ask them the same question about mental health. And what is their definition of mental health? Again, it doesn't have to be a textbook. You don't have to go Google it real fast and tell me what Google says, even though Google's amazing. So Sade, I'll start with you. What is your definition of mental health?
Okay, so because I have two mental health professionals in the room, I'm going to preface my statement by saying this is a very non-clinical definition, okay? But just my perspective. So the way that I define mental health, for me, it's kind of like the condition of a person's mind at any moment in time that's influenced by their ability to sink or swim when they encounter the different challenges of life. And I think for me, that really kind of resonates simply because mental health is something that you have to work on, just like your physical health. And I think sometimes, look, if you are not taking care of your body, you see some challenges in other areas. And just like with our minds, if we are not taking care of our minds, we may have some challenges in a particular area, but we can always bounce back and make some corrections in that area and move towards healing. So that's kind of how I describe mental health. Very non-clinical for the professionals in the room. I'll leave all the clinical stuff to you all.
We are all professionals. We are all the experts in our own mental health. All right, Kristy, what's your definition of mental health?
So I'm gonna give a very non-clinical answer too, because I ain't got my books in front of me and I don't want nobody coming for me. So for me, mental health is the culmination of everything about your being. So that's your emotional, your physical, your spiritual mindset. Where are you? If my physical is not good, then my emotional is probably not that great either. If my spiritual life is shaky, whatever that spiritual life may look like, then my mental and emotional is going to be shaky. And all of those facets come together to create the drive to continue to move forward every day. Every day isn't perfect, but if my mental health is at least a baseline, and we fluctuate up and down 1 or 2 notches on a good day for the average person, I think that that's what keeps us above ground, keeps us still going. So even if work is stressing me out and I go run to the gym real quick, I'm still okay. So when all of these things come together, all of the important main parts of your life comes together, your mental health is okay.
Nice. I love both of those definitions. You all are helping me. So you both are the professionals in the room. So moving back and segueing into the mental health piece that we was talking about, and Sade, I'll start with you. So what are some of the common risk factors you think that can impact a foster child's mental health?
There are a variety of things, and I'll just kind of talk about just a few. So stating the obvious, abuse and neglect are the big ones that can really impact a young person's mental health who's in the foster care system. If you think about the state of Arizona, we have approximately 14,000 youth in foster care at any given moment. And that is a lot of cases of abuse and neglect. It doesn't necessarily mean that every single one of those 14,000 will have some type of adverse effect or impact on their mental health, but it definitely increases the likelihood. So that those two are the big ones. One that I would like to talk about a little bit that maybe isn't as, I would say, I don't hear enough about it, is domestic violence. And so what a lot of people don't understand is that when a young person is exposed to domestic violence, it increases their risk of being victims, or I guess I would say victims of abuse and neglect within the home. And so the big thing I would say is just abuse and neglect just in general, but domestic violence and having that exposure. And it just is unfortunate that a lot of our young people succumb to the negative impacts of their parental figures or caregivers in that manner. But those are some of the things that really can impact a young person's mental health.
That is like huge what you're talking about. And that's definitely something that no one thinks about, because when we think about foster parents, foster families, we think nice, good, loving homes, right? That's the first thing we think about. But if they're already in a violent situation, they can come together for whatever reason. Or I like what Kristy said, that check, they can come together, get it together. And this is something we want to do for this income. We'll bring this child into our home. But if their home is at mess, they're coming in the middle of that mess. And you're talking about somebody that's already experienced some type of trauma. Now they're in other trauma. And, I was thinking about also with foster children and their mental health, the ability, you're already detached from family. And then you're moved into another home. So now I'm having to learn this home. But typically with moving, I don't know if this is everybody's experience, but like going to different schools, being moved to different schools. So there's not that ability to just connect with anyone, right? It's bad enough I was detached here, but now I find somebody, I may really like them. I find a family that I may really like, detached again. And so that can definitely increase the risk. So Kristy, turning the same question over to you. What are some of the common risk factors that you believe impacts foster parents' mental health?
Sure. So I think that unfortunately the system isn't set up to check the foster parents' mental health. Like, they come in once for licensing, and even though they have their yearly checks, checks and balances, it's really a checks and balances. That's a pre-scheduled visit. So you get notice to get your house in order, make sure everybody's clean, dressed up, everybody on good behavior, ain't nobody on punishment. But you get advance notice. There isn't a system set up to evaluate the mental health of a foster parent. You would never know that a foster parent has their own PTSD, has their own trauma. They're victims, or they're recovering from a domestic violence situation. You don't get those notifications. They're not checking for that. They're checking for what they can see right here in real time. And I think that's a concern for me. So my parents, stable. I mean, I'm biased, but I would say they're stable and okay. But because I've worked in this field, I've gone into homes and I've seen foster parents where I'm like, why do you have children? Why are there children in your home? Because you're not okay. So I think that some of the things that foster parents are susceptible to are very much the same as what the children are. If we're not checking for it, we're just putting these kids in similar traumatic situations. And I think that that's something that they need to consider looking into, is the mental health of the adults in the room.
Mm-hmm.
I agree, because even if we wanted to do a noble thing, such as foster parenting, or probably even taking in family members, we're doing it because this is the right thing to do. And I like what you said, Kristy, even jumping about the mental health, but I even think about like, it would be nice to have classes. They may have classes out there. I'm not sure because it's a lot that you're taking on. So if you're not ready, because we, got to remember, again, it's not pity the child, but we got to remember that child has experienced a traumatic whatever, being uprooted from their home for whatever reason, and they don't know you. Trust is probably looking who knows what, and they're in your home. So if you, like Kristy said, are not able to keep your mental health in line, that could cause you to develop a mental health challenge as well. Anxiety, depression, stress, so on and so on. I was reading some research where they talked about even substance use. Some people may start, if they was drinking a glass of wine, they may go to 3 bottles an evening or something. That part can manifest also. It could actually cause relationship issues for some families that are not on the same page. That child is just there. But if there was any existing or any new relationship channels, because time may look a little bit different, right? Once you bring a child in. So it used to be we could do X, Y, Z, but now this child may require an extra level of supervision. So now, no, we can't do all of these date nights and things like this that we used to. We have to figure out how to navigate. So it definitely can just rearrange what that family looks like, and that family being in position to rearrange.
And I would say, Kim, just to add, as far as classes, they do have classes, but the problem is the classes are teaching a textbook version of foster care and what the children will come in and look like. It's not realistic. It is 100% a setup for failure. I can tell you because I used to teach the classes at one of the agencies I worked for, and there's a script that you're given. And even for me, with all my experience, I would cringe at teaching the classes because I knew it was a setup for all of these parents, giving them unrealistic portrayals. The videos are from the 80s. We ain't got them kind of problems no more. The kids look a little bit different. And so when you can't train appropriately, you're setting people up who want to do a good deed. You're setting them up for failure.
Wow. That's really something to think about. Yeah, definitely not keeping up with the times, just hitting that button on that VCR. I'm just saying. Sorry, y'all. All right. We may have mentioned some of these before, Sade, but what are some of the common mental health challenges foster children may experience?
Yeah, so you just actually talked about a few of them just a few minutes ago, but according to research, we know that young people in foster care, they experience depression at higher rates, anxiety. They can experience panic disorder. They can experience, I would say, one of the trends that's been emerging, I should say, over the past 10 to 15 years is the occurrence of post-traumatic stress disorder in young people who experience foster care. And so I think some research that I read said something to the effect that approximately 20% of young people who are in foster care have symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And this should be alarming because for most people in American culture, we typically associate PTSD to veterans, people who experienced traumatic events during their service in the military. And so now we're seeing, because of the level of trauma that a lot of young people in foster care are experiencing, that they are too developing negative symptoms associated with post-traumatic stress disorder. So I would say everyone who's hearing those numbers really should be alarmed.
I agree, because those numbers are very unsettling. So, Kristy, I don't know if this is based on your personal experience or maybe something you've seen in the field. What are some of those common mental health challenges that you see or may have experienced with foster parenting?
I would say attachment is a big one. So a lot of times you have, this is partially my experience. So I would say that my dad probably struggles the most because he's the bleeding heart. So he wants to save all the little children that he possibly can. And my mother is the one to reel him back in, like, look, sir, this is temporary assignment. We've done our good deed. So I think it's the attachment piece. I think is a big one, because you do have, so most children who are removed, depending on the situation, their plan is for reunification until DCS or the state has determined that they will never reunite with their family for whatever the reason may be. And so their plan is always to return home. But a lot of times you have families that they get so attached to the kids, they've been in the home for so long, and you have the foster parents who are pushing back and making it difficult for the reunification process. And I think that that's something to be that needs to be looked at and addressed. If you have a worker that's not paying attention to why there is a barrier here, it's something to talk about. It's something to, once you remove this child or this set of children from this home, you need to have a conversation, recommend that they go see therapy or talk through it. Because I think a lot of times fostering families are doing this in place of. So not all families, but a good portion of families are fostering because they're empty nesters, or there were some fertility issues, and they don't have a realistic expectation of what fostering looks like. So understanding that, yes, it might take a year to reunite this child with their biological family, but you got to keep that emotional distance for yourself so that there isn't this struggle with returning them home. So I would say that's the biggest mental health issue that I see. My dad is okay because we always kind of check him, but a lot of families struggle and they don't have somebody to kind of reel them back in.
Wow. I was just thinking about what you were saying, especially about therapy and engaging the child, and honestly engaging any parents or anyone who's willing to do the fostering into some type of counseling or some type of therapy or classes or something, therapy, because Kristy already told us about the 80s movie, so we'll just stick with counseling or something to just help us identify those mental health challenges. Because you know what I was thinking about when I heard the both of you talking is that, and I read it in research too, that children under 18 they typically get all of those adequate services that they need, whether it's, therapy, case management, advocates, everything is laid out for them. And I know Sade and I talked about this before on Under the Scope. 18, the age 18, right? So here's the thing, everyone, the age out of foster care. And typically around that age, that's when we see that homelessness and start, going to jail and everything starts to happen. But I wanted to ask you, Sade, this question, and then I'll ask Kristy. In your opinion, do you believe that although foster children have access to these community resources that we see, that the community resources are easily accessible for our foster children?
Yes, okay, so I'll answer this question in two ways. The first part and the short part is yes. The second part and the more complicated part is no. And I'll explain just a little bit. So when it comes to community resources in general within the foster care community, knowledge is the great equalizer. If you know about something, if you know about a program, if you know about a particular thing or an organization that's providing this over here or that over there, then you easily have access to that information, right? Because you know about it. The challenge within, I would say, the child welfare system at times, and I do think it's gotten better over time, but the challenge is sometimes there's a gatekeeper between knowledge, and oftentimes we expect, the general expectation, I should say, is that case managers or social workers should be providing that information to families, foster care families, kinship caregiving families, resource families. They should be providing that information, and they should also be providing that information to youth and within the system, within foster care. And I'll pause parenthetically to say, this is not to beat up on case managers. Case managers, social workers are wonderful. You do amazing jobs. I just want to say that. Okay. Back to the point and question at hand. The issue is that oftentimes the information that should be known, and I use that word should intentionally, is not always known by the people that we expect to provide that information. And what happens is, I'll give you an example. A lot of people in the state of Arizona don't necessarily know. And when I mean people, I mean specifically foster parents, kinship caregivers, and young people in foster care, that if you are a person of color and you like to use ethnic hair care products, for example, a lot of people don't know that there are organizations within the state of Arizona that will provide ethnic hair care products for foster families, specifically for young ladies within the African American culture. We like to wear protective hairstyles, and a lot of families are not aware that there are organizations that will provide funding to get youth in foster care protective hairstyles, and even young people who have transitioned out. And so again, I go back to that statement, knowledge is the great equalizer. I'll share just a really small example that really impacted me. When I was 20 years old, and when I mean 20, I mean 20 years old and 3 months away from turning 21, I received a very panicked phone call from a social worker within the state of Michigan, because I grew up in the Michigan foster care system. And she was very apologetic. And basically this call kind of unfolded. And she told me essentially, hey, you qualified for all of this stuff, all this financial funding. You're a college student, you qualify for X, Y, and Z. Unfortunately, no one told you about it. And you're 3 months away from your 21st birthday. And at age 21, all of these services get cut off. And I can remember, again, at that time, kind of shocked, but then at the same time, kind of angry, because in some areas of my college experience, I struggled, and a little bit of assistance from the state of Michigan would have been helpful. I use that as an example to say, and again, this is not to beat up on this social worker, because she did a fabulous job for those 90 days. She gave me everything that she could give me. But the issue oftentimes comes down to having access to knowledge of said resources that makes them accessible. The resources are always accessible, right? But if you don't know about it, you can't benefit from something that you don't know about. And what I like to encourage just foster families, kinship caregivers, and even young people currently within the foster care system, or even if you know a foster parent, Google is your friend. So if you're looking for a particular resource, Google is your friend. And I will also put in a plug for the Arizona Friends of Foster Children Foundation, specifically here in the state of Arizona, because they do provide a lot of those resources that I mentioned earlier. So I'll go back to you, Kim.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that information and sharing that side, because I was going to ask you about closing that gap, and you actually answered it's getting plugged in. Google is our friend, everyone. Always remember that. If you say, I don't know, hit Google. All right, Kristy. So with you, because I know you have so many years of experience in the field, you have a passion for it, you still work in the field, all of that. I know Sade shared about the gap and how sometimes the aging out population, they get lost and they don't realize that they have these resources to continue going on. So can you elaborate on that from a foster family standpoint? And also, can you share of any community resources of what foster families can do also to help support their foster children once age 18 hits?
Sure. So I think a lot of it Sade has already talked about, because knowledge is power in this situation. So a lot of times foster families, most time are looking for small children. So they have no idea about those transitioning services and what to ask for until we coming up on that 18th birthday and that social worker shows up and they're like, okay, so where you gonna stay? And if we haven't already had this conversation, we're gonna be homeless. So we're originally from Illinois. So back where I'm from, we start talking about transition planning and what are our plans at the time of 18, we start talking about that around 15, 16 years old. What are we going to do? Because 18th birthday is coming up. Are you going to school? Are you going to work? Or what are our plans? Do you have a family member that essentially probably couldn't get the clearance to become a kinship guardian? Are we going there? So we have that conversation earlier, but a lot of times it does tie back into what Sade has already said, which is if you don't know to ask, you don't know. And so that 18th birthday comes for that foster family, as rude as it sounds, the check is going to stop. And then it becomes this difficult conversation of, what do you do? Do you put this child out on the street? Because they're not your child, technically. So there isn't this in between for foster families. It becomes a difficult conversation. So if they choose to sign what is called a voluntary agreement, and every state will essentially call it something else, but essentially it's a voluntary agreement to allow the state to remain their guardian after their 18th birthday, they can sign a contract to still stay with that foster family. Or if they're going to go off to school, it covers their room and board. They're allowed, there's a lot of allowances that come. But again, if you don't know, and you, unfortunately, like Sade said, there are a lot of good workers out there, but there are some who don't want to put in the work. Let's just be real. There are some workers who don't want to put in the extra paperwork that it takes to get this child or this young adult the services that they need to be successful after the age of 18. And I think it's important that that conversation be had sooner than later. Let's not wait until in Sade's case, 90 days before her 21st birthday, but let's not even save it until 90 days before their 18th birthday. This needs to be a conversation that we're having. Let's prepare them. Let's talk about realistic expectations. Because if this child was struggling in high school and we really had to hold on tight to get them to walk across that stage, college may not be the answer. Maybe it's a trade school. Maybe they just want to work, but we need to figure out what that plan is and hold them to it and support them the best way that we can. But foster families can only do so much.
Awesome. Thanks for these answers, everyone. And so I was so excited about having the guests on the show today. I probably didn't tell new people that's just now joining us how they can ask questions. Right now, we're getting ready to take both of these guests under the scope. Everyone, we actually do have questions pouring in. So I'm really excited right now while we get ready to have fun with this part. So those that's just joining us on Facebook Live, any questions that you have, please put your questions in the comments and I'll actually read them to the guests. Those that's with me in the Zoom room, any question, please utilize the chat. All right, so without further ado, because y'all have learned so much on this show, but let's see what questions we have now. So I'm gonna ask this question, probably to Kristy. All right, so is the mental health of foster kids checked as they go between homes or while they are in a foster home? And do you think a mental health check for foster kids will help expose mental health issues in the foster home?
Good question. So in a nutshell, no. A lot, it's the honest truth. So kids come into foster, there is no obligation to get them therapy, any type of evaluations, unless there's some developmental things that are very obvious. And if you're in a good placement, the foster parents will probably point it out and say, hey, they're not meeting milestones, or something is off here, or there's some issues at school. And you might, and I say this very strongly, you might get that worker to put in that extra work to get you connected to services. But just off regular kid coming into your home, no, there is no mental health requirement. Now, my personal opinion and recommendation is every child that is pulled from their family should be connected automatically to behavioral health services, because a foster family is not licensed or required or trained to address their mental health and their trauma. They should be getting therapy from day one, because they need to talk to someone who can help them process the confusion and their feelings about whatever they may have been exposed to. So consider a child that's been exposed to DV or abuse or neglect. They don't know that that's wrong. And what happens is when it's untreated, then it snowballs into bigger issues later on down the line. So if we intervene sooner when they're removed from their families, we can hopefully decrease the escalation of more serious behaviors later on.
Awesome. Any input, Sade? Because I do have a question for you next.
I think Kristy said it all.
I love it. All right, Sade, this question is for you. While in foster care, did you have any type of relationship with your biological family members?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. And I will say that typically when families are separated, particular sibling groups, if they're separated, the states or the child service agency, they do try to incorporate family visits. So initially, the plan for my family was reunification, I believe, initially. And so we had weekly visits with my mom, and weekly visits turned to bi-weekly visits. Bi-weekly visits turned to like once a month. And then eventually those visits went away. And that was my lifeline for staying connected to my siblings. I will say that I had an absolutely wonderful foster mother who always made it was very intentional about ensuring that I remained connected with my siblings and also with my biological mother, even though at a certain period in time, her rights became terminated and legally I no longer belonged to her. But to answer the question a little bit more succinctly, yes, I did have a relationship with my siblings. It was while I was in foster care. I think it was very strained at best, just because eventually we all were separated. If I can add on to that response and transition to adulthood, I still do have a relationship with all of my siblings, well, all except for one. And I think anybody probably understands that relationships in general take work. So I definitely am in a process of building my relationship and, of course, maintaining my relationships with my siblings. I still stay in contact with my biological mother, which is awesome because she's amazing. And I also have contact with some of my extended family members. I think COVID is a thing, and it has definitely impacted my ability to like in person visit my family members. But again, Zoom, telephone, texting, and all those things kind of come together. So I'll say yes for being in foster care, although it was strained. But as I've transitioned into adulthood, I've had to be very intentional about maintaining relationships with my biological family.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. All right, Kristy, what is one of the hardest situations you had to face, or you or your family had to face, and how did you handle it?
Ooh, okay.
To your comfort level.
Yeah, because it's been a few of them. So I'm gonna share the one that probably would make my sister laugh. So I'm the oldest of 3 biological children, and we had a teenage girl. At one point, we were dealing with teenagers. Probably we will never do that again in life. But we had like 3 teenage girls, I think, in our home. And like I said, the rules and expectations for us and them very different. And so this young girl had a lot of trauma, had a lot of issues, was sleeping around very, very much so out there, but a lot of it is a product of what she was exposed to. And one day she was mad at my mother. And we had seen her be mad at my mother before, but she went too far this day. And if anybody know, my sister is a pop-off, so she plays no games. And the girl cussed out my mother. My sister was home that day, and they're teenagers. So they're both teenagers. So let me just preface this by the rules of kids who fight other children in the home. It's acceptable, but it's not a violation for the foster parents. So let me just preface that. And I believe she swung on my mother, and my sister had to handle business. And it took a lot to break this up, because you're talking about two hormonal teenage girls who were going at it. But the problem, this is actually a very typical issue, which is we're raised, and again, let me preface it as well by we're culturally all the same. So this was another African-American child. So we're raised to, you respect your elders, period. And you definitely don't cuss out your mother. So you have my sister with that. And then you have this child over here who, was raised the same, but she's got a trauma. And how do you fix that? How do you create a balance in that situation? So I would say that's probably in the top 3 of situations that we've had to endure, but it's very typical in terms of the overall dynamic is you have to create a distinction, because you can't hold essentially the foster children to the same standards and expectations of the biological children in the home.
Got it. Got it. All right, y'all. Believe it or not, we are almost at the hour. This time passed by fast, but 2 questions. So Sade, I'll start with you. Where can we find you, and what you've been up to?
Trying to take over the world. Don't get it. So I am on Instagram, I guess, Sade Bradford or Sade Bradford Bond. People can find me. The thing about it is I'm not on social media as much as I should be. I'm going to be honest and transparent, but I will make improvements in that area. And as far as what I have been up to lately, doing a lot of work. One of my newest projects that hopefully will be out this fall, I am working on just a very short devotional for biological parents whose children were placed into foster care. I think oftentimes the biological parents can be overlooked or dismissed or kind of villainized within the foster care community, but they have experiences too. They have trauma too. The experience of having a child removed from your care is extremely traumatic. And so it's just a book that I'm working on just to encourage that population. They are as important as every other member of the foster care community. So it's just a way of me kind of, sharing the love and encouragement and support.
Awesome. Can't wait. I'll have to bring you back so you can talk about it. All right, Kristy, where can we find you, and what have you been up to?
I'm probably the same as Sade. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Christy Crawford. You probably can't find me on Facebook because of privacy settings, but you probably can find me on Instagram, Kristy Renee. And I continue to support a lot of philanthropic agencies, nonprofits back home in Chicago, still very supportive there. And then I am expanding my reach here in Arizona, assisting with a new independent living facility that's opening soon, I believe in the fall. So we have that, partnering with them, trying to give back actually to the demographic we talked about, that 18 to 21 aging out of the system. So that's what I'm working on.
Nice. This is amazing. This has truly been an amazing show. It went so fast. Y'all dropped so much information. And now our hour is up, everyone. And I am so honored today to have had both of these fabulous guests on the show talking about the impact of mental health within the foster families, whether it's the foster child or the foster family. And I think this information is so important. And I just want to publicly thank the both of you for taking this time out to come on Under the Scope. All right, everyone, before I move on and close this show out, next week is Self-Care Saturday. I know last time I said it, I was gone for a few weeks, but it's Self-Care Saturday. I talk about it, preach about it, so I need to participate in it. So I will be off, but then guess what? We'll be back June 11th, and we're talking about relationships and mental health. Ooh, child, you got to be here. All right. So we'll be back, and that'll be exciting. More to come. Watch me on Facebook. You can find me at Kimbralon B LPC, right? And I am the host of this fabulous show, Under the Scope, where good tea and reads are welcome. See you in 2 weeks, everyone. Have a great day.
You are tuned in to that praisey station, Praise.fm, where we get our praise on. 24 hours, 7 days a week.